The emergency alarms echoed through the United Nations building as world leaders rushed into the secure chamber. The message had come from space itself, impossible to ignore and terrifying in its implications. Ambassador Veltar materialized. In the center of the room, his crystalline body catching the harsh fluorescent lights and scattering rainbow patterns across the walls. Minister of Defense. Minho had seen many briefings in his 30 years of military service, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The alien's form shifted slightly as it spoke. The universal translator converting alien thoughts into human words with mechanical precision. "We have watched your species for many cycles," Veltar began, his voice carrying undertones of desperation. That needed no translation. "Your wars fascinate and terrify us in equal measure. You fight without the ancient restrictions that govern civilized warfare." General Junho shifted in his seat, his decorated uniform bearing the weight of countless classified operations. He had learned long ago that survival often meant abandoning the rules others lived by. His aide, Lieutenant Colonel Heian, took notes. On a secure tablet, already thinking about what this meant for Earth's military doctrine. 17 worlds, Veltar continued, his crystalline features dimming as he spoke. Billions of lives consumed by creatures we call the Devourers. They spread across the galaxy like a plague, destroying everything in their path. Our fleets cannot stop them because we fight as our ancestors taught us to fight. Sora leaned forward, her diplomatic training kicking in despite the impossible circumstances. "What makes you think we can help where your forces have failed?" The alien's form pulsed with what might have been fear or hope. "Because you have never learned to fight fairly. Your species wages total war while we engage in limited conflict. You target supply lines while we seek honorable single combat. You use deception while we announce our intentions." President Tahun studied the tactical displays that appeared around Veltar's form. The images showed beautiful alien ships arranged in perfect formations, engaging enemy forces that moved like wolves hunting sheep. The contrast was stark and telling. "These Devourers," Minho said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned military wisdom. "They fight to exterminate?" "Yes. They consume entire populations. They use captured civilians as weapons. They turn our mercy against us by hiding behind non-combatants while they prepare their next assault." Junho understood immediately. Aliens were fighting a total war enemy with limited war tactics. It was like bringing swords to a gunfight, except the stakes were entire civilizations. "Your honor code's hand spoke up, ignoring protocol. They prevent you from targeting civilian infrastructure." Veltar's form flickered with obvious discomfort. "All sapient life is sacred. We cannot target breeding centers or resource production facilities if civilians work there." The human military leaders exchanged glances. They had fought insurgencies where the enemy used schools as weapons depots and hospitals as command centers. They knew the terrible mathematics of warfare where mercy could mean defeat, and defeat could mean extinction. "Show us everything," Minho said finally. "Every battle record, every tactical analysis, every weakness your enemies have exploited." The holographic displays filled the chamber with scenes of warfare that looked more like elaborate dances than serious combat. Alien fleets maneuvered in beautiful patterns, following rules of engagement that their enemies ignored completely. It was like watching a chess match, where one side followed all the rules, while the other side simply swept the pieces off the board. Sora watched the recordings with growing horror. "Your people die because you fight like gentlemen while they fight like animals." "This is why we need your help," Veltar admitted. "Your species has survived by adapting to any threat. You fight dirty when necessary. You sacrifice pieces to win the game." President Tahun stood and walked to the tactical displays. The images showed Devour swarm tactics overwhelming disciplined alien formations. It was clear that the aliens' technology was superior, but their tactics were from another age. "If we help you," Tahun said slowly, "our people will fight the way we know how to fight. We won't follow your honor codes. We won't limit ourselves to your rules of engagement." Veltar's crystalline body pulsed brighter. "We understand. We are desperate enough to accept any help." Junho stood as well, his mind already working through the implications. You're asking us to turn your people into soldiers like us.
I once.
We do that. They can never go back to fighting the old way. The old way leads to extinction, Veltar replied. Perhaps it is time for a new way. Minho looked around the chamber at his colleagues. They all understood what this meant. Earth was being asked to export its most dangerous knowledge, how to wage war without limits, how to win at any cost, how to become the monster that other monsters feared. We'll send volunteers, Minho said finally. But understand this, when we're done training your people, they won't be the same species that started this war. They'll be something new, something that can survive. Veltar's form began to fade as the transmission ended. Thank you. The galaxy will remember what Earth has done. As the alien ambassador disappeared, the chamber fell silent. Outside, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, unaware that its children had just been asked to teach the galaxy how to wage total war. The humans in that room knew they were about to unleash something that could never be contained again. The massive alien space station stretched across the viewport like a crystal city floating in the darkness. Admiral Wook pressed his face against the reinforced glass, studying the alien fleet that surrounded them. The ships were beautiful works of art, with flowing curves and gleaming surfaces that caught starlight like jewelry. They looked like they belonged in a museum, not a war zone. Behind him, the human team finished their final equipment checks. These were not the kind of people who appeared in recruitment posters. Colonel Ji-hoon's face carried scars from 3 different wars, and his eyes held the distant look of someone who had seen too much death. Major Nari moved with the quiet efficiency of a predator, her weapons secured but ready for instant use.
Captain Doyen
Studied intelligence reports while cleaning his sidearm,
act muscle memory.
keeping his hands busy while his mind worked. Listen up, Wook said, turning away from the viewport. These aliens have been fighting this war for years and losing badly. They think war is some kind of sport with rules. We're about to show them what real fighting looks like. Docking. Process took longer than any human military operation would allow. The aliens seemed to care more about ceremony than efficiency. Elaborate protocols for everything from atmospheric pressure adjustment to security clearances. Ji-hoon watched the process with growing irritation. Knowing that somewhere in the galaxy, people were dying while bureaucrats argued about proper procedures when the airlock finally opened. The reception committee was waiting in perfect formation. Their armor was polished to mere brightness. It's decorated with symbols and badges that seemed designed more for parades than protection. Field Marshal Keksari stood at the front, her forearms holding what appeared to be ceremonial weapons that had never seen actual combat. The contrast was immediate and shocking. The humans wore practical combat gear in neutral colors, with equipment arranged for quick access rather than visual appeal. Their boots were scuffed from real use, their weapons showed signs of maintenance and wear, and their posture spoke of people who expected violence at any moment. Welcome, heroes of Earth, Keksari began, her translator converting her words into formal, flowery language. We have prepared quarters befitting your status. Our cooks have studied human nutrition requirements to provide suitable. Where's your command center? Ji-hoon interrupted, stepping forward without regard for alien protocol. His combat fatigues looked like work clothes next to the aliens. Ceremonial dress. Keksari's tentacles moved in what the humans would later learn was confusion. Surely you require rest after your long journey. The traditional greeting ceremony, people are dying right now while we stand here talking. Nari cut in, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to life and death decisions. Show us your war room immediately, the alien officers looked at each other uncertainly. In their culture, warriors were treated with elaborate respect and given time to prepare themselves mentally for combat. These humans seemed to treat war like an urgent job that needed immediate attention. Doyan had already moved to the tactical displays mounted on the docking bay walls, studying the fleet positions and battle reports with professional interest. His expression grew increasingly grim as he processed the information. You're arranged in parade formation, he said, not looking away from the displays. Perfect lines, equal spacing, textbook positioning for a ceremonial review. The ancient formations have served our people for thousands of years, one of the alien officers protested. Against enemies who followed the same rules, Doyan replied. These devourers are using wolf pack tactics against your sheep formations. They're picking you apart because you're predictable. Kexari approached the humans, her earlier formality replaced by growing concern. But the code of honorable engagement requires proper battle arrangements. Cannot simply. The code is killing your people, Jehun said bluntly. Look at your casualty reports. At how many worlds you've lost. Your honor code is a luxury. You can't afford any more. The alien field marshal gestured toward the corridor leading deeper into the station. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in the Strategic Planning Center. As they walked through the corridors, the humans noticed more troubling signs. The station was built for beauty rather than function, with wide open spaces that would be impossible to defend and decorative elements that served no practical purpose. The alien crew members they passed wore uniforms that prioritized appearance over utility. And their weapons were ceremonial rather than practical. How long has your species been at war? Nari asked as they entered the command center. War Kexari seemed puzzled by the question. We have been in conflict with the Devourers for several cycles, but war is too strong a word. We engage in limited military actions according to established protocols. The humans stopped walking. Book looked at his team and saw his own thoughts reflected in their faces. These aliens didn't understand that they were in a fight for survival. They were still thinking of this as some kind of formal competition with rules and boundaries. The command center confirmed their worst fears. The tactical displays showed battle plans that looked like chess games, with careful moves and counter moves. That assumed both sides would follow the same basic rules. The alien officers discussed strategy in terms of honor and proper procedure rather than victory and survival. Jihun studied the most recent battle reports, his expression growing darker with each page. Field Marshal, you're not fighting a war. You're playing a game while your enemy is committing genocide. Kexari's form seemed to shrink slightly. What do you mean? You mean you called for heroes, Wook said, his voice carrying the weight of hard experience. But heroes are for stories. What you need are soldiers. And soldiers do whatever it takes to win. The smoke still rose from the twisted metal that had once been the Devourer forward base. Commander Sung picked his way through the debris, his boots crunching on broken alien technology and scattered weapons. Around him, alien soldiers wearing human-modified armor moved with purpose. Their movements efficient and deadly rather than ceremonial and beautiful. 18 hours ago, this base had been considered impregnable by Galactic Council's standards. The Devourers had held it for 3 years, using it to launch attacks that killed millions of innocent people. Traditional alien military doctrine suggested a careful siege lasting months, formal challenges, and proper battle protocols. The humans had different ideas. Field Marshal Kexari stood among the ruins, her 4 eyes wide with shock as she watched her own troops behave in ways she had never seen before. These were the same soldiers who had served under her for decades, but they moved like different creatures now. They checked corners with weapons ready, secured prisoners with cold efficiency, and spoke in the clipped military language the humans had taught them. This cannot be how civilized beings conduct warfare, Kexari whispered. More to herself than to anyone else, Dong looked up from his tactical display, where he was coordinating the destruction of enemy supply caches. You're civilized. Warfare was getting your people exterminated. We taught them how to survive. The transformation had been swift and brutal. 3 weeks of human training had turned ceremonial soldiers into efficient killers. The aliens learned to use cover, to target enemy weaknesses, and to think of war as a problem to be solved rather than a dance to be performed. Most importantly, they learned that the enemy's comfort was less important than their own survival. Look at them, Kexari said, gesturing toward her troops. They move like hunters now. They think like predators. Major Yoon emerged from what had been the base's command center, her armor stained with the strange blue fluid that served as devourer blood. She carried a captured enemy weapon in one hand and a datapad in the other, already analyzing intelligence gathered from the defeated position. The psychological warfare broadcasts worked better than expected, Yoon reported to Sung. Half the enemy garrison surrendered without firing a shot, The other half broke and ran when we hit their communication center. Kexari watched her own. Communication specialists working alongside human experts, using captured Devourer equipment to broadcast messages designed to terrify and demoralize enemy forces. The content of these broadcasts would have horrified her a month ago. But now she found herself approving of their effectiveness. You turned fear into a weapon, she observed. Fear has always been a weapon, Yoon replied matter-of-factly. People just never learned how to use it properly. But Devourers have been using it against you for years. The battlefield told the story of a completely different kind of warfare. Instead of the careful formations and honorable single combat that had characterized alien military operations for millennia, the area showed signs of coordinated chaos. Human-trained forces had struck simultaneously at multiple points, targeting not just military assets but the infrastructure that supported them. Supply depots had been destroyed. Communication arrays lay in ruins. The base's power generation systems had been surgically disabled. The Devourers hadn't just been defeated. They had been systematically dismantled as a fighting force, Captain. Hannah approached with casualty reports, her expression professionally neutral despite the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Final count, 12 friendly casualties, all minor. Enemy losses are approximately 3,000 combat-effective personnel, plus complete destruction of their forward operating capability. The numbers hit Kexari like a physical blow. In a single engagement lasting less than a day, the humans had achieved what her forces had failed to accomplish in years of careful, honorable warfare. The mathematical reality was undeniable. Human methods worked where alien methods had failed. Oh, is this possible? Kexari asked, studying the tactical displays that showed the complete collapse of Devourer resistance in the sector. Sung finally looked directly at her, his expression carrying the weight of hard-earned military wisdom. Because we don't fight. Fair. We fight to win. Your people spent generations perfecting the art of honorable combat. My people spent the same time perfecting the science of total victory. Around them, alien soldiers continued their work with mechanical precision. They processed prisoners according to human-designed protocols, secured intelligence materials using human techniques, and prepared defensive positions based on human tactical doctrine. These were no longer the ceremonial warriors who had begun. This campaign, your species has taught mine something terrible, Kexari said quietly. We taught them how to survive in a universe that doesn't care about honor, Yoon corrected. The Devourers never followed your rules. Now your people don't have to die following rules their enemies ignore. The alien field marshal looked across. The battlefield where her transformed soldiers worked alongside their human advisors. The efficiency was undeniable, but so was the fundamental change in what her people had become. We asked for heroes to save us, Kexari said finally. Sung nodded grimly. You got soldiers instead. Heroes fight for glory. Soldiers fight for results. Your people are alive because we gave them results. As the sun set over the captured base, Kexari realized that her species had crossed a line they could never uncross. They had learned to wage war the human way, and there would be no going back to the old codes of honor and ceremony. The galaxy had gained an effective fighting force, but lost something precious in the process. The monsters were winning, and that was exactly what the situation required. The emergency meeting room deep inside? The Galactic Council headquarters had no windows and triple-layer security shields. Admiral Yemen sat in his chair watching alien faces that showed emotions. He had learned to read over the past 2 years. Fear, disgust, and something that might have been regret filled the room like a toxic atmosphere. Counselor. Zetkin's crystalline body flickered as he spoke, the light patterns indicating severe, emotional distress among his species. The final battle lasted 6 hours? 6 hours to destroy an entire star system. The Devourer homeworld is gone, not conquered. The holographic displays around the table showed the aftermath of the last major engagement of the war. Once a thriving enemy system had existed, now only debris fields and radiation signatures remained. It was thorough, efficient, and absolutely final. Yemen kept his expression neutral as he reviewed the tactical reports. Colonel Moran had followed human doctrine to its logical conclusion. When facing an enemy that reproduced quickly and raised its children as weapons, the solution was mathematically simple. Remove the ability to reproduce and train future soldiers. 17 billion lives, whispered Counselor Herdeye. Her tentacles trembling with what humans had learned was deep grief among her people. Your protege erased 17 billion lives in a single day. 17 billion enemy combatants and potential combatants, Yemen corrected without emotion. The devourer species had no civilians in any sense that we would recognize. Every individual was part of their military structure from birth. The alien counselors exchanged glances that spoke of conversations held in private, away from human ears. They were learning to think like their human advisors. The realization terrified them. General Sung Jin entered the chamber with Colonel Moran beside him. Both officers moved with the confident stride of soldiers who had accomplished an impossible mission. Their uniforms were clean and pressed, but their eyes held the distant look of people who had seen the end of a species. Status report, Yemen requested, though he already knew the details from classified communications. All Devourer military assets have been eliminated across 17 star systems, Sung Jin announced to the chamber. No Mi fleet strength is now 0. Enemy industrial capacity is 0. Enemy population capable of military service is 0. The silence that followed was profound. The aliens around the table were processing the complete elimination of a threat that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. They had wanted victory. They were discovering that total victory looked very different from their expectations. Counselor Herdeye leaned forward, her voice carrying accusation and horror. You didn't just defeat them. You hunted their civilians. Like wild animals. Children, Yemen. You authorized the killing of children. Moran stepped forward before her commanding officer could respond. Her voice carried the cold certainty of someone who had made peace with difficult decisions. Devourer children were military assets. They were genetically modified for combat and raised from birth to kill. A 10-year-old devourer was more dangerous than most adult soldiers from council species. They were still children, Herdeye insisted. They were weapons shaped like children, Moran replied without hesitation. We destroyed the weapons to protect the innocent. Every devourer child that survived would have grown up to consume entire worlds. Veltar, the original alien ambassador who had contacted Earth, spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. What have we become? Our own military forces now refuse to surrender in battle. They fight to the death because you taught them that mercy is weakness. Yemen stood, his decorations catching the artificial light. Each medal represented a victory that had been impossible under the old way of fighting. We taught them that. Surrender is a luxury they can afford only when their enemies share their values. The Devourers never took prisoners. Your people were dying because they expected quarter from an enemy that gave none. But now our species have changed, Sedkin said, his crystalline form dimming further. Our soldiers execute prisoners sometimes. Our fleet commanders target civilian infrastructure. We have become like you. You have become survivors, Sun Jin corrected. Before we arrived, your casualties were measured in billions per engagement. Now you win battles with minimal losses because you fight to win rather than to follow rules. The tactical displays around the room showed the new reality of galactic warfare. Council forces now moved with human-taught efficiency, striking at enemy weaknesses without regard for traditional combat protocols. Surrender was rare because both sides understood that modern warfare was about elimination rather than defeat. Counselor Herdeye gestured toward the displays showing empty star systems where Devourer worlds had once existed. And what happens when the next threat emerges? What happens when some other species challenges the Council? Will you teach us to exterminate them as well? Moran's smile was cold and professional. If they threaten innocent life and refuse to negotiate, then yes, we will eliminate the threat completely. It's what you hired us to do. We hired you to help us survive, Veltar said quietly. And you have survived, Yemen replied. Your species will continue to exist because you learned to fight like humans when fighting like humans was the only way to live. The chamber fell silent as the alien counselors contemplated their new reality. They had called for heroes and received soldiers. They had wanted salvation and received transformation. The galaxy was safe, but the price had been the fundamental nature of warfare itself. Outside the shielded chamber, the galaxy continued its ancient rotation. now protected by species that had learned the human way of war. They were no longer the civilizations that had originally called for help, but they were alive and in a hostile universe. That was victory enough. Ambassador Suyun walked into the Galactic Council chamber and immediately noticed how different everything had become. The beautiful decorative walls were gone, replaced by tactical screens showing fleet positions and battle readiness reports. The elegant alien furniture had been replaced with practical workstations designed for rapid decision-making. During crisis situations, the council members themselves had changed even more dramatically. Where once they had worn flowing ceremonial robes that emphasized their peaceful nature, now they wore practical military uniforms with armor plating. Field Marshal Keksari sat at the main table, her once pristine appearance now marked by scars. From battles that would have been unthinkable before humans arrived, the hegemony forces have stopped their advance, Suyun reported, reading from her secure datapad. Their fleet commanders are sending diplomatic signals requesting immediate negotiations. 5 years had passed since the Devourer War ended with the complete elimination of that species. 5 years since the galaxy learned that human military doctrine meant fighting until the enemy could never threaten anyone again. The lesson had spread throughout the known worlds. A new aggressive species had taken notice. Keksari studied the tactical displays with eyes that had learned to see warfare the way humans did. The hegemony leadership made a critical error in judgment, as they believed we would respond to their invasion using our old methods of limited engagement and ceremonial combat. General Kuhn, who had risen through the ranks by applying human military principles with ruthless efficiency, reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Hegemony forces are retreating from 4 star systems. Their diplomatic corps is requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations under emergency protocols. The speed of the enemy retreat spoke volumes about how much the galaxy had changed. The hegemony had expected to face the same ceremonial resistance that had made previous conquests easy. Instead, they encountered council forces that fought with human-trained efficiency and human-inspired ruthlessness. "What terms are they offering?" Suyun asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Complete surrender of all military assets," Kyung replied without emotion. "Total disarmament of their fleet and ground forces. Relocation of their political and military leadership to designated worlds where they can be monitored by council. Security forces." Around the table, alien representatives who had once been shocked by such harsh terms now nodded in approval. They had learned that enemies who surrendered under such conditions rarely attempted future aggression. Mercy that allowed defeated enemies to rebuild and attack again. It's not mercy at all, it was delayed cruelty to future victims. Counselor Veltar, whose crystalline form now showed the stress patterns that came from years of making life and death. Decisions spoke quietly. The hegemony leadership will likely reject these terms. Their cultural programming emphasizes honor through resistance. Then we will implement the terms without their cooperation, Young stated, as matter-of-factly as if discussing weather conditions. Human tactical doctrine is quite clear on how to handle non-cooperative enemy leadership. The chamber fell silent. Except for the constant hum of computers calculating optimal attack patterns and resource allocation for military operations. Through the armored viewport, patrol fleets moved in precise formations, their movements guided by human tactical principles that prioritized efficiency over traditional alien concepts of beautiful maneuvering. Suyun studied the faces around the table, seeing beings that had been fundamentally transformed by their contact with human military thinking. These were no longer the peaceful, ceremonial leaders who had first contacted Earth in desperation. They had become something new, something that could survive in a hostile galaxy. Counselor Veltar, Suyun said, her voice carrying the weight of historical significance. "Do you remember when you first contacted Earth? You told our leaders that you were calling for heroes to save your people." The alien diplomat's crystalline body flickered with patterns that humans had learned, indicated deep regret mixed with acceptance. "That is correct. We believed we needed heroes to lead us to victory. Instead, we sent you soldiers," Suyun continued. "We sent you people who understood that victory and survival require actions that heroes in stories never have to take." "You sent us monsters," Veltar said quietly. Su-Yun smiled, but the expression held no warmth or humor. We sent you the monsters who saved your entire civilization and every other peaceful species in this galaxy. She turned to address the full council, her voice carrying the authority of someone representing the species that had changed the fundamental nature of galactic politics. This galaxy remains at peace, not because its inhabitants have chosen peace, but because potential aggressors understand the consequences of choosing war. That understanding exists because they fear what we have become. As the official session ended, Su-Yun remained at the viewport, watching the combined fleets patrol. The space around the council station. Human-designed warships moved alongside. Alien vessels that had been rebuilt according to human specifications for maximum combat effectiveness rather than traditional aesthetic concerns. Behind her, alien officers worked with human advisors to coordinate defensive strategies using tactical principles that emphasize total victory over limited engagement. They had learned to think like humans when planning military operations, which meant thinking about how to end conflicts permanently rather than simply winning individual battles. The transformation was complete and irreversible. The galaxies. Peaceful species had learned to fight like humanity's most effective killers, and that knowledge could never be unlearned. They were no longer innocent, but they were alive, and in a universe full of species that viewed weakness as an invitation to attack. Survival trumped innocence. The monsters were on their side now, and that made the galaxy safer for everyone who chose peace over aggression.